Do you think the BBC is institutionally
No,
biased?
I don't, and I'm sure someone's going to correct me pretty quickly if I'm wrong, but I just reread the memo yet again outside the door here. I don't think I used that phrase anywhere in the memo, and I do not think it's institutionally biased.
You mentioned the memo a few times. You also told us that you'd sent it to Ofcom, DCMS, and you'd had that meeting with the BBC. 2 weeks later, the Telegraph had that memo, and they said that it was circulating around government departments. Do you have any idea how that memo got to those other departments or the Daily Telegraph?
No, absolutely not. All that I know is what I've stated.
Did you share that memo with anybody else beyond the BBC board?
Absolutely
and those
not.
committees?
Oh, well, sorry, Ofcom and DCMS, but beyond that, no.
So somewhere there's a leak. Any idea where that might be?
The case. No, I have no idea. And as regards particularly Tim Davie, for what little use or worth this is to him now, firstly, I always liked the guy, and secondly, most importantly, to the extent that inexpert me can judge, he seemed to me to be doing a first-rate job across 80 or 90% of the portfolio. It was just that he had this blind spot on editorial failings. I think it's a bit of a tragedy he's gone. I thought he was a supreme talent, but he had this blind spot.
Do you agree with Donald Trump's assertion that his reputation has been damaged by this documentary, considering, of course, that he was found to be a central figure in this insurrection, considering that he has been found by a civil court as being liable for sexual assault, that he's regularly boasted about sexual assault? Do you agree with Donald Trump that this documentary has harmed his image in some way?
If I could answer in two parts, as it were. Firstly, I'm supposing, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I should probably restrain myself a little bit, given that there is a potentially a legal action. All I can say is I can't think of anything I agree with Donald Trump on.
Back on the splicing, in his sacred job memo to us, Dr. Shah mentions that since your memo, Mr. Prescott, the corporation's had 500 complaints, and that has, I quote, prompted further reflection. And as a result of that further reflection, the BBC now accepts that the splice gave the impression of a direct call for violent action. I remember the first time I saw the splice, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, that's awful. And then I checked a transcript of the speech itself, and that confirmed it. Were you surprised that it took the BBC multiple iterations and multiple months to work out something as straightforward as that splice was that misleading?
Yes, in a word. I mean, this was, in the memo I talk about my great frustration and how I'm writing to the board because of this frustration, and that was a very easy to understand example, that we had a BBC management that would defend and stand by that video edit, which is exactly what was going on, and that's why I was one of the reasons I was in despair, but it was possibly the purest example.
Do you think the corporation has what you might call a bigger truth problem? That there's a bigger truth that the vast majority of BBC output is good, therefore it's less important when something is misleading? Or indeed on the specific episode of Panorama, there was a bigger truth that the programme was trying to get across about that day and Capitol Hill and the character of President Trump, and therefore it didn't matter so much that this thing was spliced in a way that specific impression was clearly so misleading.
Well, I think the truth is we still don't know what went on within the Panorama production team, whether it was some weird kind of accident or someone working under pressure. We just don't know. But as regards the wider BBC, I mean, I've had people I know and don't know texting me, emailing me and so on, who clearly appalled by that. So I don't think it's a bigger problem. It was just this curious management blind spot.
Thank you. I just realised you didn't quite answer my last question. Do you agree that Donald Trump's reputation has been tarnished by this documentary?
Probably not.
Did the BBC block the head of news from apologising for the Panorama programme before the 10th of November?
I will directly answer that question, but if you may forgive me, I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to apologise to all the people who believe in the BBC and care for it and wish it to survive and thrive. I'd like to apologise to the licence fee payer who funds the BBC to deliver its mission. And I'd like to apologise to the thousands of people who work for the BBC, our staff, who work with such dedication and commitment to deliver the output we all enjoy so much. I regret the mistakes that have been made and the impact that has had. Let me now come to the question that you asked. Just, if I may ask you, just repeat it for me so I can answer it directly.
Did you block the head? Did you and the rest of the BBC board block the head of news from apologising for the Panorama programme on the 10th of November?
You go back to the week in which the story broke in the Telegraph, and you wrote to me, and I was writing the answer to you. I heard that the news wanted to apologise for the splicing of the edit with a white spark. I thought that was a necessary thing to do, but wasn't sufficient, because the fundamental issue here was the sequencing of the edit and the placing of the Proud Boys march. I think the real issue here was the impression left that the President Trump, in his 6th of January speech, had called to violent action. And what we had to apologise for was that, as well as the splicing of the edit. It's my view that editing interviews is a normal journalistic practice. So that in itself is not what the problem was. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for. So the answer to your question is, I didn't think it was adequate. I thought it was necessary but not sufficient.
It seems quite clear to me that the way that both the Newsnight and Panorama edited this clip broke those BBC editorial guidelines. So what I'm just trying to get to grips with is why it took a year to apologise for this failing, despite the EGSC, which you chair, having concerns about this programme on 3 separate occasions, and why no action was taken despite the fact that there was a clear evidence of a breach of editorial guidelines.
As I said, in the January meeting, that report came out. I then invited the news division to give me a formal response to it. That response took place in May, and we discussed it then, and there was a different set of opinions around it. There was a plausible case that this edit, because the point of the programme was to deliver to the British audience, because it was about the supporters for President Trump and what they were learning. So there was a case for, as it were, the edit. This was discussed and debated, and there was a difference of opinion. I've already said we should have pursued it further at that time. And by pursuing it further, we should have investigated it in detail with the people responsible in the BBC to do that.
Part of some of those discussions, there was a continuing and sharp difference of opinion between certainly the chairman and me and some others on the board with the director of news about whether we were going to apologise just for the edit, or whether the impact of the edit and indeed the positioning of the Proud Boys material had given a misleading impression. We felt that it had, and the news continued to maintain that actually the impression given despite the edit was correct, because the gist of the speech by Trump had, for example, the use of the word fight 15 times and only talked about peace once. And they felt that the edit was justified, but it should have been a more transparent edit. We felt that the edit had led to a more profound problem. And indeed, your quotation of the editorial guidelines is absolutely right. We felt it violated them.
So I'm old enough to remember 2007, before your time leading the organisation, but when the BBC was in hot water over the misnaming of a kitten.
Oh, yes.
You do get held to a higher standard. That comes with the privilege of the licence fee. But on that occasion, it also took over a year and a leak for it to come out. So it's kind of all very well to say, well, we must just do better at coming out faster. But what is going to make the BBC face up and fess up faster?
I think that's such an important question. And I understand the scepticism that it always seems to take time. I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm heartened by one other area. It's a parallel area which I was involved in. I took very great care to accept, which was what we call the culture review, where in my first year I was determined to tackle abuses of power. And there was a lot of, we do this year in, year out, it's always happened. And there was some skepticism. But in the event, we did a very strong review. We came out earlier this year with, and I and the board, but I took personal ownership of trying to get this right in the face of skepticism. And I would say that the executive responded extremely well. There's a very serious set of actions that are in place now to tackle it. So, whilst I agree...
I'm going to have to rush you.
No, but what I would say is that I think I will equally, once I focus on it, say, what is the problem here? Why do we not come out more quickly? What is it that stops us, and how can we fix it? It's going to be absolutely one of the lessons I've learned of this particular 3 weeks. I do hear your skepticism because, you know, I remember the kitten story.
Socks, in case you're just delving deep. Socks and cookie.
Yeah. And so I think it's important, and I think it is a constant problem for the BBC that we do respond in a way that always puts us on the back foot. And I don't like that. I want us to be on the front foot and get out our statements clearly. If we made a mistake, hold our hands up fast. If we don't think it's a mistake, say that.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download MetroTV Extend sekarang.